Thank you. Merci Laurent. Merci à Lyft aussi. C'est la 5e fois que je viens parler à Lyft. Ça fait un peu badge sur Foursquare. I'll do my talk in English for the benefit of documentation, I suppose. If you have any questions in French, that's not a problem. What I'm hoping to talk to you about, firstly, I'm not Georgina. Georgina is the name written in the paper pamphlet, and she was supposed to be here, and she couldn't. She was ill, so I decided to tag along instead. Thank you. It's coming. There we go. So this is Georgina. And Georgina knows a lot more about this project from a very specific angle, and I'll talk about what makes her great at doing this. What I'm going to talk about is the behind the scenes of a successful project. I think a lot of people talk about their projects in a very positive light and talk about the learnings and the hard things, but kind of gloss over the details. And I'm not going to do that. I'm going to talk about the problems. I'm going to talk about the challenges. And I'm also going to talk about why it's still a good idea to do open projects and innovate in an open way. So what is Homesense? Homesense is at homesenseproject.com if you want to link it on Twitter. It started with a blog post. I was coming from a product design background and having worked in open source hardware for a bit, I kind of got sick and tired of seeing this, which is, smart homes. The idea of a smart home from a very top-down perspective. Every major corporation that you can think of in the home space has done a version of a smart home, a smart kitchen, a smart couch, a smart television and media center for the home, etc. And I didn't see any of those in my home particularly. And I thought, okay, well, that's one thing, but all homes are different. This is a wonderful project by a photographer called Mark Coper, who basically went into a tower block in the UK and took pictures of the same apartment and how it had been personalized. And I think those images just say exactly what life is like. You can give me a box to work with and I will make it my own. And our home is really the core of that personal space. It's that space that if you live by yourself, no one can personalize. If you do live with someone, it becomes a sort of point of conversation and sometimes tension as to how you both manage the same space. But they're very, very emotionally strong spaces. So, a lot of projects have mentioned Arduino. I'm not even going to describe what it is. You probably know. We knew about flexible tools and open tools and cheap tools that would allow hardware hackers and designers and artists and architects to kind of do something interesting. But they weren't necessarily engaging with what, at the time, we thought were normal people in normal homes. And we knew that they were building these amazing projects. These are just some of what's online. If you Google anything to do with kind of smart home and Arduino, you'll come up with wonderful projects, botanicals, an MQTT and Arduino Lite to tell you, when things are happening online, an alarm clock with Arduino, a cat dispensing machine with Arduino, a cat food dispensing machine, all sorts of crazy projects that people have built in the context of them knowing exactly what they wanted to do and knowing exactly about the technology that they wanted to use. So, I got sort of interested and wrote this long rant online about how it would be great if you gave those tools to people who had no technology experience, who just had normal homes. And maybe the home of the future and the smart home of the future can emerge from the tiny bits and pieces that people pull together, because that home of the future is more useful, because it's more personalized. And that innovation comes from the people and the need directly, as opposed to coming from a production line in Asia that allows you to maybe see something in Monoprix and then go, this would be kind of useful, this kind of fits. So, and also doing that in a way that was open, that was Creative Commons, that kind of shared all that knowledge with everybody else, that no one could own a piece of it. because we were a small studio, we were very flexible, and also, I didn't know what would come out of this. So I wrote this blog post, and then I came to Lyft in 2009. I think it was probably my second Lyft, maybe, at that time. And I met two wonderful guys, Edouard and Charles, who are both on Twitter, who work for EDF, and who are EDF R&D. And we started working together, nothing to do with Homesense at the time. We just started running workshops and helping them kind of innovate internally. And then they read this on our website, and they're like, oh my God, we totally want a piece of this. This would be amazing. And I kind of came back to them and said, you do realize we'd like this to be open, right? And they were fine with that, which was incredible. And I think that that's kind of a key when you're working. People kind of tend to put a package around collaborations with corporations, and if you have good people there, you will get a good project out of it, and you will get something that kind of makes sense because they understand you, you understand what they need, and you can find a middle point. So they kind of acted as sponsors for the project because, again, if you want to do something that truly has an impact, you can do one thing and one hack in our office somewhere, and then that has kind of a limited impact, or you could try doing something at scale, which requires money, which we didn't have. So EDF were like, okay, well, we'll put 50% in it in terms of cash, and then you put 50% in terms of time and effort and people, and, we'll make something good happen. So again, kind of not only having this kind of agreement with them, we didn't have anything else. We kind of put up a URL online and said, okay, well, does anybody want to have their home as a playground for this? Anybody? And we received lots and lots of submissions, and we quickly realized that we were receiving submissions from particular types of homes, from people who actually knew what we were talking about. We had to kind of think around the language of how we were communicating what the project was in order to get normal people. And we also kind of thought that the tech side of things would not be an issue because we had a big community of people we were already talking to, and surely we could find some really nice guys or girls who could help out with the Arduino side of things, and that wouldn't be a problem. It turned out that it was harder to try to find people who wanted to get engaged from the tech side of things than it was to get households. And we did have to actually try to make sense of it all. So this is an open studio that we had in our office just to get anybody to come and ask questions about what this was. And this is a tally on a whiteboard at some point of all the countries of people who'd applied, who was on the household side and who was on the tech side. So eventually we had to kind of bring it back down and choose, and we chose these lovely people. And so it's not all of them because some of them didn't feel like they wanted to put their picture online. But we have people who are basically from across Europe along this very strange straight line. So Letterkenny, which is in Ireland, we have a home and someone helping out in Manchester. We have 2 households in London, and we were based in London, so it was also easier to support them there. A household in Paris, and also 2 people helping with the tech for 1 household in Geneva. And we ended up with tons of things that people basically were helping each other make. And so 6 households, 4 countries. 3 months didn't end up being 3 months. It ended up being a little bit longer. And so what happened? What were people doing? People were given this. This was called the Homesense kit, which was designed with 2 designers from Highwire program, which is a postdoctoral program in Lancaster. And it's a kit that's based around the Arduino. So again, if you've seen an Arduino, it's kind of the size of a credit card. And we built this ginormous box full of add-ons and elements that you could kind of build projects on. There was a book that was kind of edited in order to show someone with absolutely no technology experience what they could do, what they could build, what they would want to build, and to act as a starting point for conversation with someone who had quite a lot of tech knowledge. Long wires, and I'll talk about that, why that's important. And also just kind of thinking about the graphics of it and thinking about how you make these tools really friendly and how these tools don't say technology to people, but say more toy or, something useful, I guess. And people work together, and this is an example of one of them working together. So a little girl in Manchester trying to do a Santa sensor. This is in London, this is in Geneva. In Geneva, they had access to the hackspace, the local hackspace there, which kind of made things take kind of a life of its own. Lots of soldering when we hadn't necessarily planned for soldering. And lots of really exciting things. And they made things together. This is one of the London projects by Russell, who's also been a guest of Lyft once or twice, I think, who built a bike map. So there's a cycle system in London, and to be able to tell where there were bikes that were available, he had this little box to tell him, and this is directly around his home. So he can tell where he needs to walk to in order to have access to a public bike. This was a little chap, if you know your science fiction, you would know who this is, who basically told you when you left the toilet seat up and would tell you off. Because they're in a household with a child and like him, his wife, and their son Arthur. So almost sort of politeness management was outsourced to this little robot. In this case, this was built up on top of Lego, but basically to water the plants at a time when they needed to be watered. So a kit that included kind of tubes that would go into the plant and all actioned through sort of light levels and moisture levels, and just trying to basically redo what botanicals did, but in a very cute way, in a new way, and also redefining what the product design around that is. And a light manipulator, which they built, and I'll talk a bit about why that's really interesting, where they basically wanted to dim the lights when the light, or shut the lights off when the light level outside was high enough. So you don't need to have your lights on when it's quite sunny. But if you're not around, or if you've been on holiday, if you're not at home, then the lights just stay on. And so that's a simple kind of, energy saving sort of activity, but it's actually quite a pain in the ass to set up. So this was the little Santa detector, which had kind of, again, using light, you could tell if someone had been next to the Santa stash or not, and they built it for Christmas. This was also something to actuate a radio when the light would come on in the morning, so that you had the kind of bubble of radio as you were waking up, as opposed to the kind of bam of an alarm. And something to tell you if your coffee was still drinkable or not, depending on temperature. So this is sort of ongoing for about 6 months. We went to all of those locations and talked to people, actually introduced them to each other, because they were often in the same room or in the same city, obviously. And the whole process of going to see 6 different households in 4 different countries was quite long, was quite expensive, and in parallel to that entirely, we had to close the studio. So this is a very nice blog post by Matt Webb, who I was very grateful for, because he was quite nice to us. That didn't mean that the project needed to end in any way, shape, or form, because in a way, it was isolated, in terms of image, at least. And so we tried really hard to kind of keep going, and to keep the momentum going, to keep people posting pictures of what they were doing. And of course, that momentum is really hard to maintain when you no longer have employees, and there's no one in the room, and the room doesn't even exist, and the assets have been seized. So it's quite an interesting process to try to keep something alive that almost wants to die. So Georgina, who should be standing here, was the one who just kept going. While I was having a minor nervous breakdown, she was going, no, it's fine, I'll just keep going, I'll keep emailing people and keep visiting them, and she is actually now in the process of wrapping up the entire project. Which if you're in a small, a micro SME context where we never had more than 10 people in the room, to have someone with that kind of strength is incredibly important to the livelihood of any project. It doesn't matter how big you are in a way. 5 minutes. And then something else happened, which also made me think quite hard about why it's important that these things remain open. In February this year, I got a little letter in the post. And this little letter was basically a cease and desist letter. Because a large corporation had a range of furniture called Homesense in the United States, which at the time that we came up with the project wasn't existing, and nothing was there. But when you do get that kind of letter, you go, oh my God. Because even if you're right, even if you don't impede on their trademark, even if you do nothing that really, they don't have a case, you're suddenly only 2 people working on a project. So you have all the reasons in the world to not keep going, because you don't want to be sued, you basically don't have the money to sue back or to protect yourself even. And in that situation, that's actually where our partner, EDF, was incredibly generous. And they offered us help and counseling, and I had a long conversation with their lawyers and their law consultants, and they're like, you should deal with it in this way, and you should agree to these things. And it worked, and they'll leave us alone for the time being. And that's also something that's kind of magic about working with the right people at the right time in the right place, because that often doesn't happen. People will drop you at the drop of a hat when they see that you are kind of in trouble. And in this case, I was really, really grateful to them. Because eventually we got another email, which said that the MoMA wanted to exhibit this as part of their next exhibition. So there's an exhibition starting in a week and a half called Talk to Me, which is about smart objects and how people communicate with each other, etc. And they wanted the Homesense kit in it. And that kind of suddenly sort of acts as the beam of light at the end of the tunnel, where you think, well, that's it, goddammit, this is why we did this. So that we could get that kind of, those eyeballs, and they get 10,000 visitors a day at the museum. That's quite a lot of eyeballs on a project that is kind of there, but kind of not, and also still with people who are incredibly dedicated. So, a couple of things, 2 minutes 20. I think that things that we learned from this, beyond the admin stuff, is that wires are still kind of a problem in that space. And doing something like this, which is what happened in one of the projects, is the reason why electricians exist, right? Because when you actually want to make those hacks become a reality and integrate them in real homes, you have to destroy a wall in order to make the thing happen there. And it's sort of like, oh God, okay. So you can't really act in total isolation to the existing infrastructures of why and how houses are built. The other thing we discovered is that people got really, really excited about the tools to the point of discarding the tools entirely and going for like level 11 of the tools. And so in Geneva, they kind of are, playing around with the MakerBot in order to make one of the pieces that they need in order to complete one of the projects. This was never, we never provided that. We'd never even hinted that they could do that, but they just went ahead and did it. And that's great, because that means that to a certain extent that spark that they needed was there, and they just ran with it. And also something about kind of product design, because their Santos sensor is a shoebox. Because for a child, that's as good as any toy. And any toy company, and I've worked with toy companies, will tell you that their biggest challenge is that the kids always play more with the packaging than they do with the toy. And so there's kind of a space there for things that probably aren't that clean and aren't that finished, even though they might be useful in a home context. doing this kind of stuff in a micro SME context is difficult. It doesn't mean you're protected in any capacity. You don't have a large kind of, legal department you can turn to when any of this happens. But I'm still glad I did it. I'm still glad that, the project is interesting enough and the openness actually wins. And now a lot of the households have their own blogs talking about the bits and pieces they're wanting to do. Russell is talking about making the bike map into an actual product. And that's really exciting to see that the project might have a life of its own. And finally, and this is my final slide, the idea that open innovation is something that's, very hard to do when you're an organization. And I think that multidisciplinarity and also the idea that you can be that close to people is very hard to do when you're a big business. You have interest in those things not being that functional in a way, because that makes them efficient and that makes them predictable and that makes things calculable. And in our case, 3 people from Tinker were involved. The rest was entirely done by those people across Europe who were just inventing on the fly. It's cheaper, ultimately, if you're looking at it from an organizational perspective, and the results are shared much more quickly than a white paper that you have to pay £25 for. And so I think there's definitely a space for this type of thing to happen, and I hope that I get involved in more of those as time goes by. Again, if you'd like to check out the project, it's homesenseproject.com, and thank you for your time.
Thanks, Alexandra. You're touching on a lot of big issues like smart homes. Okay, we know that all dream, but also like home hacking and people basically building the stuff that they need. A lot of questions came. I think people are very intrigued, and a lot of the audience were like, could I do this for myself? So people are asking, like, how easy is it to build such stuff? How accessible is it? What kind of knowledge do you need to have?
Zero knowledge, and we've done this with quite a range of people with zero knowledge. And they've been, once in a while, we'll kind of walk into a room full of people who are coming. So, for example, we ran a workshop with senior executives from BT who haven't touched anything in years in terms of technical stuff. They've been in administration, mostly in management, for the past 20 years. And we had them make projects within 4 hours. They'd built something that worked, that talked to the internet, that talked to Twitter, whatever it was that used these kinds of tools. We've done stuff with children and open workshops with kids who will just pick this stuff up in an hour or two. So really zero knowledge.
Somebody's asking, of course, and I think after every single presentation of you, we get that question like, where can I buy the Santa detector? People always want to buy what you show them.
I know. It's a problem because I don't own it. You'll have to talk to them. They're on the website. You can email them.
And you can build it yourself, I guess.
Exactly. That's kind of the point.
I think that there was a question, I don't know if it's for Homesense or for like building objects in general, but somebody was asking, is there a business model behind, I guess, the Homesense project? So did you have some like commercial goals in mind when doing that?
Not really. I think the other reason why Georgina got involved is that Georgina is an academic, and for us at the time, we were making our money elsewhere. And for us, it was kind of an itch to scratch, and it was very much about trying to do research inside an organization and inside a small design studio. And most people would say that that's kind of a money sink. But in a way, we had the support from EDF, so we thought we could, just kind of isolate that activity entirely. I almost didn't get involved in most of it. Georgina and Daniel, who was our designer, did all the training, designed all the kits, and all those kinds of things. There's no business model per se, because that's kind of the point of doing research in a way. There often isn't a business model. There will be things that will come out of this that potentially have commercial potential. But it was never really the point. The point was to try to do this and try to make this successful and try to actually engage with people on that basis and get them to do things for themselves and do things that worked in their home. And I think we've managed that.
Final question. You said many times, I think one of the underlying things that you said was that open always wins. And the question, it's a bit provocation, but the company that wins right now in technology is Apple, which is as open as a North Korean nuclear plant. And
quote him on this. Quote him quick.
So what do you think? Does open really win, or is actually closed systems that Apple, everything works together because it's closed and they can have control on the whole chain? So
I never got asked
gives
the
a better
Apple
experience
question.
to the end user.
I think Apple do really well because they curate, and this is something that. And we curated to some point. We curated the homes that we chose and the technical people that we chose. We discarded people on the basis that the home was a bit too techy, because we wanted, again, to get more normal households. I think everybody curates. They curate to maintain brand recognition. Because they can, and because they've created desire, and they've created things that people want. They are doing what most businesses are doing. I think they're different, they're a different kettle of fish entirely to something like this, which is much more about experimentation without that many barriers. I don't care whether the logo shows up 2 centimeters ahead of whichever one, they do. And that's what makes them, successful.
It's maybe a different stage. Thank you very much. Please
Welcome.
give a warm round of applause to Alexandra.